The gray walls of prison cell number 417 in the Winnebago County Maximum Security Facility had long been a familiar backdrop for Edward Keller. Over the past 6 years, the 30 square meters he shared with his cellmate had become his entire world. At 58, Edward remained in good physical shape. The financial fraud that landed him behind bars did not make him dangerous in the eyes of other criminals, but something in his cold gaze made even the most notorious criminals give way to him in the dining hall. 20 miles from the prison walls in downtown Rockford, the Chimera Club was preparing for its evening opening. Jessica Keller was touching up her makeup in front of a large mirror in the dressing room, critically examining her reflection. 2 years of hormone therapy had significantly changed her appearance. Her features had softened, her skin had become more delicate, and her body had taken on more feminine contours. Long dark hair framed her face, which was distinguished by hazel eyes, the only feature that reminded her of the past. "It's a full house today, sweetie. It's Friday," said Eleanor Perez as she entered the dressing room. The owner of Chimera always carried herself with elegant confidence. At 45, she retained her attractive appearance and sharp mind, which had allowed her to build a successful business in a less affluent part of town. "Ready to shine?" Jessica smiled. "As always, Ellie." The Chimera Club occupied a special place on the Rockford nightlife map. Eleanor positioned it as a high-class establishment where dancers of various gender identities worked. Despite the conservative attitudes of many city residents, the club had a stable clientele, attracting visitors from neighboring cities and even Chicago. "I've got 3 private dance requests from your admirer," Eleanor remarked, looking through the list of reservations on her tablet. "Mr. Forrester is back in town." "He's harmless," Jessica replied, putting the finishing touches on her makeup. "And he pays well." Eleanor sat down on the edge of the dressing table, staring intently at Jessica. "How's your mother? You said she was sick." "She's better now. It was just a seasonal cold." Jessica put down her makeup brush. "She wants me to come over for dinner on Sunday. She says she misses me." "You're lucky to have her." Eleanor squeezed Jessica's shoulder. "Not everyone has such understanding parents." Jessica nodded. After she decided to transition 2 years ago, her mother was the only person in her family who supported her. Her brother stopped answering her calls, and her father had been in prison for 6 years and knew nothing about her new life. Martha Keller was organizing her medications in her small bathroom. At 54, she looked older than her age. Years of stress related to financial problems after her husband's arrest and subsequent divorce had left deep marks on her face. She worked as an administrator at a local clinic, and her modest income was barely enough to pay the rent on a small 2-room apartment in the eastern part of Rockford. The phone on the bedside table showed an unread message from Jessica. "I'll be there on Sunday around 6. Anything you want me to bring?" Martha smiled as she looked at the photo in the frame next to the phone. It showed Jessica a year after she began her transgender transition, happy, finally finding herself. The decision-making process was not easy for Martha. At first, there was shock, denial, long conversations with a psychologist, and consultations with specialists. But seeing how her child was changing, finding inner peace and confidence, she couldn't help but support this choice. Something inside told her that Jessica had always been her daughter. It just took time to realize it. Lately, Martha had been tormented by one question. Should she tell Edward about the changes in their child's life? During his 6 years in prison, her ex-husband had shown no interest in their son. The last letter from him had come 3 years ago, a dry message that he had filed all the necessary documents for the final dissolution of the marriage. Martha had not been in contact with Edward, but she felt a strange responsibility to let him know the truth. After much thought, she wrote a letter, carefully choosing her words, trying to explain the situation as delicately as possible. She understood her ex-husband's conservative views and religiosity, but hoped that he would be able to, if not accept, then at least understand their child's choice. The letter was sent 3 days ago. Visiting day at the correctional facility always filled Edward with mixed feelings. Unlike most inmates, he did not expect visitors. No one had come to see him in recent years. But he was still interested in receiving mail. Occasionally, former business partners wrote to him, and sometimes acquaintances from church. Keller, mail. The guard handed him an envelope through the bars. Edward immediately recognized Martha's handwriting. This surprised him. In the years since their divorce, they had communicated only through lawyers. What could have prompted her to write now? Sitting on the edge of his bunk, he carefully opened the envelope. The letter was long, several pages written in his ex-wife's small handwriting. The first few lines were ordinary, brief news about her life, work, and health. But then, our child has gone through significant changes in life. Jamie is now Jessica, transgender, undergoing hormone therapy, working as a dancer in a club, happy for the first time in many years. Edward reread these lines several times, as if he couldn't believe his own eyes. The room around him seemed to sway. He felt the blood rush to his face. His hands begin to tremble as they clutched the thin sheets of paper. "Are you okay, Ed?" Vincent asked, noticing the change in his cellmate's behavior. Edward didn't answer. He continued reading, eagerly absorbing every word, every detail about his new life. No, he couldn't even say it in his mind. His son, his boy, whom he had taught to play baseball, with whom he had gone fishing, now called himself by a woman's name, wore dresses, and worked in a strip club. Sodom and Gomorrah, Edward muttered, crumpling the letter. My own son. Vincent watched his cellmate closely. He saw Edward's expression change from shock to rage, then to a cold, frightening calm. Bad news? He asked cautiously. Edward slowly turned to Vincent. His eyes were dry, but they showed such determination that Vincent involuntarily took a step back. Vince, Edward's voice sounded unexpectedly even. Remember when you told me about your friend who managed to get out of here through the laundry room? Vincent frowned. They rarely discussed such topics. Edward always kept his distance from prison talk about escapes and rule violations. Yes, but that was before they installed the new cameras, he replied cautiously. That trick won't work now. What if we find another way? Edward sat up straighter, his gaze focused. You said you have connections among the guards. Ed, what are you thinking? You only have 9 years left. With good behavior, they might reduce it to 6 or 7. Is it worth the risk? Edward carefully folded the letter and hid it under his mattress. His movements were methodical, as if he had already made up his mind and was now simply carrying out the necessary steps. Some things can't be ignored, Vince, he said quietly. Sometimes you have to take action to fix what's gone wrong. My son is confused, he's been deceived, he needs help. Vincent understood that there was more to these words than just a desire to help. But he also knew that Edward had always been generous and fair to him, protecting him from trouble with other inmates and sharing parcels from the outside world. Listen, let's not rush into anything, Vincent said, sitting down next to Edward. Tell me what happened. Maybe there are other ways to solve the problem. Edward was silent for a few seconds, then handed Vincent a crumpled letter. Read it yourself. While Vincent read, Edward stared out the small barred window of the cell. His thoughts were already far beyond the prison walls, in Rockford, where his son lived in sin, denying his nature, his essence, everything he had been taught since childhood. Edward felt he had to do something. He had to save his child before it was too late. I need to get out of here, he said firmly, and you're going to help me. 2 weeks after receiving the letter, cell number 417 had become an escape planning headquarters. Late at night, when most of the prisoners were asleep, Edward and Vincent pored over homemade diagrams of the prison, drawn from memory. The main problem is the outer perimeter, Vincent whispered, pointing to a line he had drawn. 4 towers, searchlights, thermal imaging cameras. Even if we get out of the block, they'll spot us right away. Edward slowly traced his finger along the diagram, from their cell to the boiler room. What about supplies? You said there's a guy among the drivers. Vincent glanced nervously at the cell door. Mike. He delivers laundry supplies twice a week, but he won't risk his career for nothing. How much? Edward looked his cellmate straight in the eye. 10,000. Each, Vincent exhaled. 5 for him, 5 for me. For that kind of money, he'll agree to hide us in the car. But do you have that much? Edward smirked. The feds didn't find everything I earned. There's an account in the Cayman Islands that my old partner has access to. He owes me a favor. Within a week, the plan was finalized in detail. Vincent contacted a guard who, for a fee, agreed to turn a blind eye to their absence during the evening roll call, giving them almost 4 hours before they would be discovered. Mike, the laundry van driver, was to hide them among the bags of dirty laundry and drive them out of the prison grounds. Next, they would go to an abandoned warehouse in the Rockford industrial zone, where a car arranged by Edward's former business partner would be waiting for them. "What are you going to do with your son?" Vincent asked one day as they sat in the dining room. Edward put down his fork and stared at his plate for a long time. "I have to bring him back to a normal life. It's all the influence of the modern world, the internet, other twisted people like him. Jamie was always a good boy. But he's a grown man now, Ed. How old is he? 26. It's his choice. There is no such choice. To be what God did not create you to be." Edward's voice hardened. "I believe it's not too late to fix everything." Something in Edward's tone bothered Vincent, but he decided not to pursue the matter. After all, the escape plan was his chance for freedom. What Edward did after that was his own business. The Chimera Club was buzzing with music and the voices of the Friday night crowd. Jessica was finishing her performance on the main stage, a sensual dance to a slow song that drew thunderous applause. In the spotlight, she felt real, whole, accepted for who she was. Back in her dressing room, Jessica wiped the sweat from her face. 2 years ago, she had crossed the threshold of Chimera for the first time, uncertain, just beginning her transition, looking for work. Eleanor gave her a chance when many doors were closed. Brilliant performance. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, holding a glass of champagne. "Mr. Forrester asked for you. He booked the VIP room again." Jessica smiled as she accepted the glass. "You know, sometimes I think he's not so much in love with me as with the idea of me. A transgender dancer is an exotic addition to his collection of experiences." "Perhaps." Eleanor sat down next to her. "But he respects boundaries and pays well. That's rare in our business." They drank to a successful evening. Jessica cherished these moments, brief respites before the next performance, when she and Eleanor could talk as friends rather than employee and boss. "Ellie, can I ask you a personal question?" Jessica set her glass down. "You've never told me why you support people like me. Most club owners wouldn't take the risk." Eleanor looked thoughtfully at her reflection in the mirror. "I had a younger sister, Maria. She was born in a boy's body, but she always knew who she really was. It wasn't easy in our conservative Mexican family. My parents sent her to a religious camp to be corrected. She couldn't take it and killed herself at 17. Jessica squeezed Eleanor's hand. "I'm so sorry. I vowed to protect people like her." Eleanor brushed away an invisible tear. "I will create a place where people can be themselves. Chimera is more than just a club to me." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was time to prepare for the next performance. Jessica felt a special connection with Eleanor. They both knew what it meant to be an outsider, to fight for the right to be themselves. Detective Alex Sanders was reviewing reports of a series of robberies in the northern part of Rockford. At 38, he had been working in the homicide department for 10 years, earning a reputation as a methodical and tenacious investigator. "Coffee?" His partner, Diana Rodriguez, placed a cup on the table. "You look tired." "Third day with no leads." Alex rubbed his nose. "No surveillance cameras caught the car, no witnesses, no fingerprints. Professional work. Maybe we should check recently released prisoners?" The modus operandi is similar to Morales' gang. Alex shook his head. Morales is still in prison, but it's a good idea. Request a list of everyone released from Winnebago and neighboring counties in the last 3 months. The phone on the table rang. Alex listened to the caller, taking notes in his notebook, his face becoming more and more focused. "What's going on?" Diana asked when he finished the call. "Escape from Winnebago Correctional Facility. 2 inmates, Edward Keller, financial fraud, and Vincent Donahue, armed robbery." Alex quickly scanned the data on his computer. Keller is 58, served 6 of 15 years. Donahue is 35, served 3 of 8. "I don't understand why they're calling us. This is a matter for the feds and the marshals." "Keller is local. He has connections here, and prison officials believe he may remain in the city. We're being asked to assist in the search." Alex opened the database and entered Keller's name. I wonder what could have made a man with good behavior, who had only 9 years left to serve, take the risk and escape. "Maybe he had a good reason to get out," Diana remarked, looking at Keller's photo on the screen. "Family? Money? Ex-wife, 26-year-old son, divorced after his conviction." Alex leafed through the file. "Let's start with them. Maybe they know something." Wednesday evening was cold for early autumn. The laundry van left the prison gates right on schedule at 7:30 p.m. At the wheel was Mike Jenkins, an employee of a contracting company that had been servicing the prison for 10 years. No one noticed his nervousness. He had always been a quiet guy. In the back of the van, buried deep in bags of dirty laundry, lay Edward and Vincent. Breathing through the thin plastic tubes leading outside was difficult, but tolerable. The vehicle was searched at the exit according to standard procedure, a cursory inspection of the cab and a quick glance into the back. The van drove for about 30 minutes before stopping. They heard the back door open. "All clear. Get out." Mike's voice sounded muffled. Edward got out first, greedily gulping in the fresh air. They were in an industrial area on the outskirts of Rockford, an abandoned warehouse with broken windows, surrounded by empty parking lots. "Your friend said the car is in the garage behind the warehouse." Mike pointed to a low building behind the main structure. "The keys are under the front right wheel. I've done my part." Vincent handed him the envelope. As agreed, 5,000. Mike quickly counted the money and, without saying goodbye, got back into the van. A minute later, its taillights disappeared into the darkness. "Let's go." Edward was the first to move toward the garage. His legs were numb from lying in an uncomfortable position for so long, but the adrenaline rush of the escape gave him strength. An inconspicuous 10-year-old gray Ford with tinted windows was waiting for them in the garage. 2 bags with clothes, documents, and money were lying on the back seat. "Your partner didn't let us down," Vincent said, as he changed clothes and examined the driver's license with someone else's name on it. "Daniel Foster? Seriously?" "The documents are temporary, just to get out of town." Edward was already studying a map of Rockford. "Tomorrow we'll contact someone who can get us real IDs." Vincent started the car. "Where are we going?" "A motel on the south side. Cheap, no cameras, cash only." Edward closed his eyes. The plan had worked perfectly, but the real difficulties were just beginning. "We'll spend the night there and start searching tomorrow." The drive to the motel took about 40 minutes. They avoided the main roads, taking detours through industrial areas. News of the escape must have already spread, but for the first few hours they had the advantage. The prison authorities could be hiding the information, trying to find the fugitives on their own to avoid a scandal. The Blue Star Motel lived up to its reputation. Shabby walls, dim signs, an indifferent clerk who took a week's worth of money without even looking at the guests. In the room, Edward's first move was to turn on the small TV and tune it to the local news channel. So far, there had been no reports of the escape. "How are you going to find your son?" Vincent settled into the second bed, opening a can of beer from the mini fridge. There was no address in the letter. "The Chimera Club. Let's start there." Edward took a notebook out of his bag and began to write down a plan of action. We need to find out when he works. And then what? Break into the club and drag him home? Ed, he's a grown man. I just want to talk. Edward looked away. Explain what he's doing to himself, to his soul, to his future. Bring him back to a normal life. Vincent snorted skeptically, but said nothing. Something in Edward's eyes made him doubt his peaceful intentions. But right now he was too exhausted from the escape to argue. Tomorrow I'll go on a reconnaissance mission, Edward continued, unpacking his bag on the bed. Among the clothes and money, Vincent noticed something metallic. Is that a gun? He stood up, tense. Insurance. Edward put the weapon back in the bag. Just in case. I don't plan on using it. Vincent felt a chill run down his spine. He hadn't mentioned the need for a weapon when they were planning the escape. It was Edward's initiative, and that was alarming. Listen, Ed. Vincent chose his words carefully. I helped you get out because you've always been honest with me. But if you're planning something illegal, I don't want to be a part of it. Edward looked at Vincent for a long time, then smiled faintly. Don't worry. I just want my son back. Everything will be fine. But something in his eyes said otherwise. The damp morning of his 5th day of freedom greeted Edward Keller with dim light filtering through the motel's tattered curtains. He had been sitting in a rented car for 3 hours, opposite a 2-story building in the eastern part of Rockford, where, according to his observations over the last few days, Jessica lived. The small River Gardens apartment complex attracted students and young professionals with its low rent and proximity to the city center. Edward adjusted his cap, pulling the visor down lower, and raised his binoculars to his eyes. Hours of observation were beginning to pay off. He had studied Jessica's schedule, her routes, her habits. On weekdays, she left the house around 3 in the afternoon and walked to the bus stop. In the evening, she returned by taxi, usually after 2 in the morning. Edward followed her to the Chimera Club several times, but did not go inside, fearing to attract attention. There he is, our boy, Edward muttered when he saw the familiar figure in a light coat coming out of the building. Jessica was taller than Edward remembered, with long dark hair and a graceful gait. Even from a distance, he could see how his child's appearance had changed. Feminine features accentuated by makeup, soft movements, confidence in her posture. This sight always evoked a mixture of anger and incomprehensible melancholy in him. Today, he decided to follow her entire route. When Jessica got on the bus, Edward followed it in his car, keeping his distance. 20 minutes later, she got off at a shopping center in downtown. This deviation from her usual route caught Edward's attention. He left his car in the nearest parking lot and continued his surveillance. Jessica spent about an hour in the mall. Going into clothing stores, Edward kept his distance, moving between shop windows and racks of merchandise, trying not to give himself away. In one of the boutiques, she spent a long time choosing a dress, trying on several options. Watching his child happily admiring herself in the mirror in a tight-fitting red dress, Edward felt his hands tremble. He had to go outside to calm down. "What have they done to you, Jamie?" he whispered, leaning against the wall of a building. "How have they poisoned your mind?" After a while, Jessica left the store with her purchases and headed for the exit of the shopping center. Edward continued to follow her, keeping a safe distance. Instead of taking the bus, she took a taxi to the Chimera Club. It was early afternoon, and the club was not yet open to the public. Edward parked in an alley with a good view of the service entrance. He saw Jessica go inside, followed later by other employees. Gradually, a plan formed in his head. He knew Jessica's daily routine, knew when she was most vulnerable, late at night, on her way home. But first, he needed to talk to her alone, convince her to return to her real life. And if talking didn't help, Edward's hand involuntarily touched the inside pocket of his jacket where the gun was. Detective Alex Sanders carefully studied the escape case files spread out on the table. 5 days of searching had yielded no results. The fugitives seemed to have vanished into thin air, The only witness was Mike Jenkins, the driver of the laundry van, who confessed under pressure that he had helped the prisoners leave the prison grounds in exchange for a reward, but he did not know their further route. "What do we have on Keller?" Alex asked his partner Diane, who was looking through files on the computer. "Ex-wife of Martha, lives alone in an apartment on Oak Street," Diana replied, without looking up from the screen. "Works as an administrator at St. Joseph's Medical Center. Son, or rather daughter, Jessica, 26 years old. Underwent gender reassignment surgery 2 years ago. She works at the Chimera nightclub, which specializes in shows featuring transgender artists." Alex tapped his pen thoughtfully on the table. "Interesting. Keller was known to be extremely conservative according to his prison records. And here we have this situation in his family. Do you think it could be related to the escape?" Diana looked up from the monitor. "Quite possibly people with radical views often act rashly when it comes to their families." Alex put down his pen. "We need to talk to Martha Keller and check out that club." An hour later, they were ringing the doorbell of Martha Keller's modest apartment. The door was opened by a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a wary expression. "Mrs. Keller, Detectives Sanders and Rodriguez, Rockford Police Department." Alex showed his badge. "Can we talk to you about your ex-husband?" Martha paled, but silently stepped aside, letting them in. The small living room was clean and tidy, although the furnishings betrayed modest means. On the table was a photograph of a young woman, Jessica. "I heard the news," Martha said quietly, sitting down in an armchair. "The prison called me 2 days ago. They asked if Edward had tried to contact me." "Did he?" Alex watched her reaction closely. "No, I haven't seen him in 6 years." She looked away. "We divorced after his arrest." "Mrs. Keller, we have reason to believe that your ex-husband may try to find your daughter." Alex nodded at the photograph. "Have you been in contact with him recently? Perhaps writing letters?" Martha visibly flinched. "Yes, I have. About 3 weeks ago I wrote to him. For the first time in several years." "What was the letter about?" Diana asked gently. Martha clasped her hands on her lap. "I told him about Jessica, about her transition. I thought he had a right to know. It was stupid, I know." "It wasn't stupid," Alex reassured her. "But considering your ex-husband's views, didn't you think this news might upset him?" "Of course I did. But I didn't think he would." Martha's voice trembled. "Do you think he ran away because of this? Because of Jessica?" "It's possible," Alex said, taking out his notebook. "Did you warn your daughter?" "I tried. I called her yesterday, but she said I was worrying for nothing," Martha said, looking anxiously at the detectives. "Jessica hasn't spoken to her father since his arrest. She doesn't know how unyielding he can be." "We need to talk to your daughter urgently." Alex stood up. "Where can we find her?" Eleanor Perez approached the window of her office overlooking the alley behind the Chimera Club for the 3rd time that evening. Her intuition, honed by years of working in the nightlife industry, told her that something was wrong. "That guy again," she muttered, noticing the man in the cap sitting in a car across from the service entrance. For the 3rd night in a row, she had seen this figure watching the club. Patrons often waited in their cars, but not for hours, and not in the service parking lot. Eleanor returned to her desk and checked the surveillance cameras. The club's security system was sophisticated. Several years ago, radical activists had threatened to set fire to the establishment, and since then, Eleanor had taken any suspicious signs seriously. "What do you want, buddy?" She zoomed in on the image, trying to make out the observer's face, but the visor of his cap hid his features. Deciding to check the situation herself, Eleanor left her office and went down to the dressing room, where Jessica was getting ready for her performance. "Jess, sweetie, have you noticed anything strange in the last few days? Maybe someone has been paying too much attention to you, following you?" Eleanor asked, sitting down on the edge of the dressing table. Jessica looked up from the mirror, where she was fixing her makeup. "No, why?" Maybe it's nothing serious. Eleanor tried to sound calm. I just noticed a suspicious person near the club. He's been watching the service entrance for several nights in a row. Probably just another curious person. Jessica smiled carefree. You know, some people get excited at the mere thought of seeing a real transgender up close. Maybe. Eleanor wasn't convinced. But still, be careful. Don't walk home alone. Call a taxi right to your door. You sound just like my mom, Jessica laughed. But noticing the serious expression on Eleanor's face, she added, Okay, I'll be careful. Speaking of your mom, Eleanor recalled their conversation that morning. She called the club today, looking for you. She sounded very worried. Jessica sighed. Yes, she's been trying to scare me for 3 days with stories about my father escaping from prison. She says he might be looking for me. But that's ridiculous. He hasn't seen me in 6 years. He doesn't even know what I look like now. Your father escaped from prison? Eleanor sat up straight, her face serious. Jess, this is no joke, especially if he found out about your transition. Mom says she wrote him a letter, Jessica dismissed, though there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice. But that doesn't mean he escaped because of me. He could have had other reasons. It doesn't matter. Eleanor stood up. Starting today, Marco will walk you to the taxi, and I want to know when you get home. Call me, okay? Jessica nodded, feeling her carefree attitude give way to a slight uneasiness. Maybe her mother's fears weren't so unfounded after all. Tension was mounting between Edward and Vincent in the motel room. Vincent was growing increasingly concerned as he watched Edward's obsession with his child take on unhealthy forms. You've been watching her for 5 days now. Vincent sat on the bed, watching Edward lay out his notes on Jessica's movements on the table. When are you going to just talk to her? Everything in its own time, Edward snapped, without looking up from his notes. I have to choose the right moment, when she's alone, when she's ready to listen. Are you sure she'll want to listen to you? You haven't been part of her life for 6 years. Edward turned sharply. Don't refer to him as her. Jamie is my son. Okay, whatever you say. Vincent raised his hands conciliatorily. But don't you think it's time to move on? We need to leave town. The police are probably already questioning your ex-wife, checking all your connections. I'm not going anywhere without Jamie. Edward slammed his fist on the table. I didn't risk my freedom to back down now. Vincent stood up and moved closer, lowering his voice. Ed, I'm starting to think you're planning something more than just a conversation. Why do you need a gun? What are you going to do? Edward stared at Vincent for a long time, his gaze cold and determined. I'm going to save my son's soul, by any means necessary. Ed, you're saying terrible things. Vincent took a step back. Escaping from prison is one thing. Violence is another. I didn't sign up for that. No one is talking about violence. Edward turned away toward the window. The gun is just insurance. Some people only understand the language of force. What people, Ed? Your child? Or those around him? Edward didn't answer, continuing to stare out the window. Vincent felt that the situation was getting out of control. Maybe he should warn someone, but who? He was a fugitive himself, and his word against Edward's was worthless. I'm out of this, Vincent finally said. I'm leaving tomorrow. I advise you to do the same. As you wish. Edward didn't even turn around. But remember, you're an accomplice to the escape. They'll be looking for you just as much as they're looking for me. Vincent shook his head. I'd rather spend another 10 years in prison than be part of what you're planning. Martha Keller was waiting for her daughter at the entrance to her apartment. After talking to the detectives, she couldn't shake her anxiety. She called the club, but Jessica was busy performing. Mom? Jessica got out of the taxi around 2 in the morning, looking surprised. What are you doing here? We need to talk. Martha hugged her daughter, and they went up to the apartment together. Inside, Martha's first move was to check the locks on the windows, which did not escape Jessica's attention. Mom, you're scaring me. Jessica said, taking off her coat and shoes. "What's going on?" "The detectives came to see me today," Martha said, sitting down on the sofa and gesturing for her daughter to sit next to her. "They're investigating your father's escape. They think he might be looking for you." Jessica sighed. "Mom, we've already discussed this. Even if he is looking for me, what can he do? I'm an adult." "You don't understand, Jess." Martha took her daughter's hands. "Your father has changed a lot over the years. He has become even more radical in his views. And when it comes to religion and morality, he can be unpredictable." "So you think he might hurt me?" Jessica finally began to take the situation more seriously. "I don't know," Martha replied honestly. "But the detectives think it's possible. They asked me to tell you to be careful and report any suspicious people or situations." Jessica looked thoughtfully out the window. "Eleanor said someone has been watching the club for the last few days." "What?" Martha gasped. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't think it was important," Jessica said, lowering her head. "I thought it was just another curious onlooker." "Jess, please stay with me for a few days," Martha asked. "At least until the police find your father." "Mom, I have a job. I can't just drop everything because of some assumptions." Jessica hugged her mother. "But I promise to be more careful. I'll always take a taxi and ask the security guard to walk me home. And if I notice anything suspicious, I'll call the police right away." Martha wanted to argue, but she knew that her daughter had inherited the stubbornness of both her parents. "At least promise me you won't go anywhere alone. And call me every evening after work." "I promise." Jessica kissed her mother on the cheek. "And don't worry so much. The father I remember would never hurt me." Edward Keller's 7th day of freedom was cold and rainy. Sitting in a rented car opposite the Chimera Club, he watched as the last patrons left and the staff cleared out. Vincent had left yesterday, taking his share of the money and promising not to reveal Edward's plans. Now he was alone with his obsession. At 3:21 a.m., the service door opened and 2 figures appeared on the threshold. Edward tensed when he recognized Jessica by her light-colored coat. Standing next to her was the club's security guard, who now accompanied her to the taxi every night. This complicated the plan. Edward waited patiently. The taxi arrived 5 minutes later. The guard watched Jessica get into the car, then returned to the club. Edward followed, keeping his distance from the yellow car as it slowly made its way through the deserted streets of Rockford. He knew the route by heart, but today he noticed something unusual. The taxi did not turn onto the usual street. He followed it until the car stopped near a 24-hour pharmacy. Jessica got out of the taxi and headed for the entrance. Edward saw the driver drive away. Apparently, she had let him go. This was the chance he had been waiting for. He parked across the street, pulled his cap down over his eyes, and got out of the car. The pharmacy was empty, except for a sleepy pharmacist behind the counter and Jessica, who was studying the shelves of medicines. Edward stopped at the entrance, gathering his thoughts. He hadn't seen his child in 6 years, and now a stranger stood before him, with feminine features, dressed in women's clothes, wearing makeup, with long hair. Jessica approached the cash register to pay for her medicine when she noticed a man staring at her in the security mirror. Something in his gaze made her flinch. "Jamie," Edward said quietly as she walked past. Jessica stopped when she heard her former name. She slowly turned and looked at her father's face for the first time in 6 years. "Dad?" Her voice trembled. "What are you?" "We need to talk." Edward nodded toward his car. "Please." After a moment's hesitation, Jessica agreed. They got into the car, Edward behind the wheel, Jessica in the passenger seat, her bag on her lap, ready to jump out at any moment. "Why did you do this to yourself, Jamie?" Edward asked. "Why? We raised you in the faith, taught you to distinguish between right and wrong." "My name is Jessica," she replied quietly but firmly. "And I didn't do anything to myself. I just became myself, who I always was inside." "It's a deception, a devilish temptation." Edward shook his head. God created you a man, my son. I don't reject anything. Jessica took a deep breath. I'm just living my life, Dad. For the first time, a truly happy life. Happy? Dancing half naked in a club for perverts? Edward slammed his palm on the steering wheel. That's not happiness, Jamie. That's sin and delusion. You haven't seen me in 6 years. Jessica tried to get through to her father. You don't know what I've been through, how I suffered trying to live up to your expectations. Lying is what you're doing now. Edward raised his voice. Pretending to be someone you're not. Jessica reached for the door handle. This conversation is pointless. No. Edward started the engine. We're not done yet. The car started moving. Jessica tried to open the door, but Edward activated the central locking system. Please let me out. Her voice trembled. We'll talk somewhere quiet. Edward drove through the deserted streets, leaving the city center behind. I won't hurt you. I want to help. I don't need help. Jessica searched for her phone in her bag. Stop immediately, or I'll call the police. Edward turned into an abandoned industrial area where warehouses once stood. He turned off the headlights, stopped the car, and turned to his daughter. I escaped from prison for you. His voice sounded frighteningly calm. To save you, to bring you back to your real life. This is my real life. Jessica found her phone, and you have no right to interfere with it. Edward saw the phone in her hand and grabbed her wrist sharply. Who are you going to call? Your twisted friends? That woman from the club who encourages your sin? Their argument escalated. Jessica accused her father of abandoning her and her mother and now trying to control her life. Edward insisted that he had always thought about her and prayed for her. This life is not happiness. Edward took a photo out of his inside pocket, an old-school picture of Jamie. This is who you really are, my son. Jessica looked at the photo, a shy teenager with short hair and a forced smile. That wasn't me. It was a mask I wore to make you happy. No, Edward clutched the photo. It's the truth. Everything else is a lie, and I'm going to help you see that. He opened the glove compartment and took out a gun. Jessica froze, her eyes widening in horror. What are you doing? She whispered. Dad, put the gun down. We're leaving here, Edward said evenly. I found a place in Montana, a small town, good people. There's a pastor there who helps people like you. He'll bring you back to God. I'm not going anywhere with you. Jessica pressed herself against the door. You have no choice. Edward pointed the gun at his daughter. It's for your own good, Jamie. My name is Jessica, she shouted. Jamie is gone. Understand that once and for all. No! Edward raised his voice too. You are my son. You can't deny that. It's in my nature to be Jessica. She looked her father straight in the eye. And I won't let you or anyone else take that away from me. The rain intensified, drumming on the roof, drops of water running down the windows, blurring the outlines of the abandoned buildings around them. These people have poisoned your mind, Edward said quietly. That woman from the club, your mother, who encouraged this madness. They accepted me. Jessica felt tears welling up in her eyes. They loved me for who I am. That's not love, Edward shook his head. Love is telling the truth even when it hurts. Love is doing what is necessary to save a soul. Dad, please. Her voice trembled. This isn't you. You wouldn't hurt me. I know that. I have to save you. Tears welled up in Edward's eyes. Even if you don't understand. I don't hate you. Jessica slowly reached out her hand. You're my father. I've loved you my whole life, but you have to accept me for who I am. I can't. His hand with the gun trembled. I can't accept sin. Then accept me. She tried to touch his hand. Not my transition, not my life. Just me, your child. For a moment, something changed in Edward's gaze, a glimmer of doubt, but then his face hardened again. No, he said firmly. Jamie or no one. Then no one, Jessica replied quietly, because Jamie is no more. Those were the last words she spoke. Edward, overcome with rage, pain, and despair, pulled the trigger. The shot rang out deafeningly loud in the confined space of the car. Jessica slumped back in her seat, her eyes wide with shock, her hand instinctively reaching for her chest, where a dark stain was quickly spreading. Detective Alex Sanders arrived at the scene at 7:22 a.m. The body had been discovered by a worker who had come to check on the condition of the abandoned warehouses before their planned demolition. "What do we have?" Alex asked, approaching the forensic investigator. "A woman, about 25-30 years old, a single shot to the chest at close range. Death occurred approximately 4 or 5 hours ago," replied the forensic scientist. "The driver fled, leaving the weapon behind." Alex put on gloves and carefully opened the passenger door. One glance at the victim was enough. He recognized Jessica Keller, whom he had spoken to just the day before, warning her about the danger posed by her father. "Damn," he muttered. "We're too late." His partner, Diana Rodriguez, was examining the driver's seat. "Alex, look. There are fingerprints everywhere. And this." She pointed to an old photograph that had fallen between the seats. Jamie Keller Jr. "It's him." Alex clenched his fists. "Edward Keller. He killed his own child." "There's something else." Diana showed him a bag with a phone. The last number dialed was 911, but the call wasn't completed. "Time of death?" Alex asked the medical examiner. "Preliminarily between 3:30 and 4:30 a.m., the expert replied. "I'll be more precise after the autopsy. We need to inform the mother." Alex took off his gloves. "And intensify the search for Edward Keller. Now it's not an escape, it's first-degree murder." Soon his phone rang. It was the officer on duty at the station. "Detective Sanders, a man has just come to us claiming to be escaped convict Vincent Donahue. He says he wants to testify against Edward Keller." Vincent Donahue sat in the police station interrogation room, his hands cuffed. When Alex entered, Vincent looked up, his face a mixture of fear and determination. "I know where Edward might be," he said, "and I know what he did." "How do you know about what happened?" Alex turned on his tape recorder. "I don't know for sure." Vincent looked down. "But I was with him until last night. I saw how obsessed he was with saving his son. I saw the gun. I heard him say he had to fix the situation at any cost. I left because I realized he wouldn't stop." "Why didn't you come sooner?" "Fear? Stupidity? I don't know." Vincent shook his head. "But this morning I saw the news. A woman killed in a car. I realized it was Edward's doing." Alex showed Vincent a photo of Jessica Keller. "Do you know this woman?" "No." Vincent looked closely at the photo. "I've seen photos from before her transition. Edward showed me old family photos, but I've never seen her like this." "Where could Keller be hiding?" "He has an acquaintance in the south of the city, a former business partner." Vincent gave the address. "Or he might be heading to Montana. He mentioned some pastor there who cures transgender people." "You're facing serious time for escaping, Mr. Donahue." Alex stood up. "But your cooperation will be taken into account." "I know." Vincent looked up. "I deserve to be punished. But Edward has to answer for what he did. I didn't think he was capable of that." "People blinded by hatred are capable of terrible things." Alex headed for the door. "Especially when that hatred is disguised as love and care." Edward Keller sat in an abandoned hunting cabin in the woods, 30 miles from Rockford. The cabin belonged to an old friend who had no idea that Edward had escaped from prison. He sat motionless, staring into space, his hands still seemingly covered in blood, even though he had been rubbing them furiously for hours. Outside, he heard the sound of approaching sirens. Edward slowly raised his head. He knew they would find him sooner or later. Perhaps Vincent had told them about the cabin, or the police had tracked him down by the car he had abandoned a few miles away. He wasn't going to run or resist. Everything he had lived for had been destroyed by his own hands. He gathered the photographs, folded them neatly into his pocket, and stepped out onto the porch of the cottage, where the first rays of sunlight were illuminating the clearing where the police cars had stopped. Detective Sanders leaned over a map of the county spread out on the table in the operations room. Red markers indicated possible hiding places for Edward Keller, as described by Vincent. "We checked his ex-partner's house." Diana Rodriguez pointed to a mark in South Rockford. "It's empty, but neighbors saw a car similar to the one at the crime scene last night." Alex rubbed his chin. "He's looking for temporary shelter." According to Vincent, Keller had a backup plan, a hunting cabin in the woods belonging to an old friend. "We found the owner," Diana confirmed. He didn't know about Keller's escape, but he confirmed the existence of a cabin 30 miles north of the city. He provided the exact coordinates. "Assemble a capture team," Alex said, straightening up. "Keller is armed and has already proven he is willing to kill. No risks." In the next room, Vincent Donahue was supplementing his testimony, describing Edward's psychological state in the last days before the breakup. He was obsessed with the idea that he could fix his child. Vincent shook his head. He talked about some pastor in Montana who brings people like that back to normal. I saw the hatred in his eyes, a fanatical conviction that he was doing God's will. "Do you think he planned the murder?" asked the assistant district attorney. "No," Vincent thought. "He probably wanted to kidnap her, make her renounce her new identity. But Edward isn't the type to take no for an answer." In the cabin, Edward Keller sat clutching photographs in his hands. The clock on the wall read 6:32 a.m. After the murder, he returned to the city, to his business partner's house, but couldn't bring himself to go inside. Instead, he remembered the cabin where he used to hunt with his friends. An open Bible lay on the table in front of him. Edward searched the sacred texts for justification for his actions, but instead of comfort, he found only condemnation. "Thou shalt not kill," a simple commandment that he had violated in the most terrible way. "I thought I was doing your will," he whispered, looking at the yellowed pages. "Saving the soul of my child." But deep down, Edward already understood that his actions were guided not by love, but by fear, anger, and pride. Fear of a world that was changing too fast for him. Anger at those who accepted what he could not accept. Pride that made him believe he had the right to decide how another person should live. He carefully placed the photos in an envelope and wrote Martha's name on it. Then he added a short note. "Forgive me. I loved him in my own way, but it wasn't the kind of love he needed." By 8 in the morning, the operation to arrest Edward Keller was in full swing. 3 police cars and a SWAT van moved along the forest road, maintaining radio silence. Alex Sanders rode in the first car, reviewing Edward's file. "How are we going to proceed?" asked Diana, who was behind the wheel. "Standard procedure," Alex replied. "Cordon off the perimeter, offer to surrender. If that doesn't work, storm the place, but I don't think he'll resist." "Why are you so sure?" "Because he killed the most precious thing he had." Alex closed the folder. "People like Keller live by their principles, even if they're twisted. Now he has nothing to protect, nothing to prove." The cabin appeared in a gap between the trees. It was a small wooden structure with a porch, a typical hunter's retreat. The chimney wasn't smoking, and there were no signs of movement. "I see a car behind the house," reported the officer from the 2nd Patrol. "A gray Ford, matching the description." Alex gave the signal to stop 300 meters from the cabin. The SWAT team took up positions, surrounding the building. Alex picked up the megaphone. "Edward Keller, this is the Rockford Police Department. You are surrounded. Come out with your hands up." Nothing happened for a few seconds. Then the door of the house slowly opened. Edward appeared on the threshold, gaunt, with reddened eyes, but calm. He raised his hands and took a step forward. "Slowly get down from the porch and lie face down on the ground," Alex commanded. Edward obeyed without resistance. 2 officers quickly approached, handcuffed him, and helped him to his feet. As they led him to the police car, Alex met his gaze. "Edward Keller, You are under arrest for the murder of Jessica Keller. You have the right to remain silent." "Jamie," Edward said quietly, interrupting the detective. "His name was Jamie." Alex stared intently at the arrested man. "Her name was Jessica," he said firmly, "and you killed your daughter." Something flinched in Edward's face. For the first time in days, he heard the truth without embellishment, without excuses. He had killed his child. Not for the sake of higher principles or the salvation of his soul, but because of his selfishness and inability to accept another person for who they were. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In his prison cell, Edward Keller sat on the edge of his bunk, holding a worn Bible in his hands. On the wall opposite hung a photograph of Jessica, the only one he was allowed to keep. He looked at his daughter's face, at her happy smile, at the confidence in her eyes, and finally began to see what he had not been able to see before. His child, free from fear and pretense, who had finally become herself. "Forgive me," Edward whispered, knowing that there could be no forgiveness. But perhaps the realization of his own mistake was his true punishment, more severe than any prison term. Thus ended the story of Edward Keller, a man whose blind faith and inability to accept change destroyed his family, took the life of his child, and left behind only pain and regret. A story that reminds us that true love does not seek to change another person, but accepts them whole, with all their peculiarities and differences.